Well, hey guys, I'm here at Fort Sill, Oklahoma. I thought this was a good opportunity to talk about part of this New West period after the Civil War that we hadn't got to say too much about, and that's the period concerning the Indian Wars and cavalry and forts. And it's really, since these Indian Wars have been going on so long, since exploration began, it's really the last period of the Indian Wars after the Civil War. So this is Fort Sill, Oklahoma. It's home of the artillery nowadays. It's one of the, one of the few forts from back in the 1800s that's still in use today. Of course, it's a lot bigger today, and you can see some of the older buildings out here in the big grassy area where they had the parade grounds and things like that, which is really the common feature of some of the early forts, and I'll say something about that in a few minutes as well. But, after the Civil War, the United States, and that mainly the North, of course, had to really return back to the West and pick up where they left off. And many of the Indian tribes in the West, many of which you've heard, made a lot of gains during the Civil War, pretty much since North and South were battling it out with each other. And so a lot of the older forts were reestablished, and some newer ones were made. Fort Sill here, I believe, was 1869 or so really a few years after the Civil War, pretty much during Reconstruction. I don't know if you can see over in this corner area of the parade ground, there's a little monument near the stop sign over there. Marker just pretty much indicates that this is the original area when the fort was established, 1869, I believe. Unlike what you see in some of the movies, that most of these military forts, which are mostly cavalry mounted troops, of course, weren't fenced in per se. They were usually pretty open like this, almost kind of has a college campus look. Texas had plenty of these. And if you go to Fort McCavitt, that's probably one of the better preserved ones, and it was larger than some as well. And it's just a lot of buildings, usually an open area like this, what we call the parade field. And the only fenced in area usually be the stockade or something like that, or the corral area, which I might show you that later as well. This was General Sheridan, was one of the northern commanders who was in charge there after the Civil War in the South, and he named this post after one of his friends from the Civil War, General Joshua Sill, and that's usually how most of these forts got named, through some commander who was oftentimes killed or wounded or something like that in whatever the preceding war was. In Texas, of course, a lot of those forts were named after soldiers like that were killed usually before the Civil War, because so many of those forts started prior to that. It's the parade field. I don't know if you can see it or not. Usually out in the middle will be the flagpole, which you probably see over there. And then all the buildings you see around the perimeter, including some of these, were oftentimes barracks, and the better houses would be like officers' quarters, which would be where they lived, things like that. And you can see really all the way around. There'd be some buildings on the outside of that as well. A lot of civilians hanging around too, and there's plenty of houses, a couple churches and things like that as well. And that's once the fort gets more developed, if it lasts that long. And there's another sort of close-up of what you might see. And you've probably seen stuff like this in some of the movies. Like I said, this is a pretty good example of some of that. Let's see if I can zoom in over here. Okay. The stuff all around Oklahoma here has got these names, and I'll try to cover some of that when I can.